The Primordial Soul King, a Naruto x Bleach crossover. Act 1, The Weight of Light. Chapter 1, The Weight of Light. There was no warning before the world came apart. One moment Naruto Uzumaki stood at the edge of the Valley of the End, boots planted in the wet grass, the waterfall roaring behind him and the last embers of a hard-won battle still cooling in his palms. The war had ended. Not cleanly, not without cost, but it had ended, and he had come here alone the way he always did when the world was too loud and his own chest was too full. He came here to breathe. He came here because the stone faces of Hashirama and Madara watched from either cliff without judgment, and sometimes that was the only company that felt right. He had no intention of going anywhere. Then the sky split open. It was not like a Kamui tear. He had seen those, that clean elliptical rip in the fabric of space with its spiraling center pulling everything inward. This was different. This was not a wound. It was more like a door that had always been there suddenly choosing to show itself, a threshold of pale gold light carved into the air above the waterfall with the precision of something deliberate, something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. The light did not hurt to look at. It was warm in the way that early morning is warm, the kind of warmth that reaches the bones before the mind catches up. Kurama noticed before Naruto did. The fox spoke from somewhere behind his sternum, and the word came not as sound but as sensation, a low vibration in the marrow. Naruto did feel what the fox was pointing toward. He had felt it for the last several seconds and been trying to decide if it was his imagination. It was not his imagination. There was something pulling at him from the direction of the light, not forcibly, not the way a jutsu grabs and yanks, but the way a river pulls at a stone it has shaped over centuries. Patient. Inevitable. That is not chakra, Kurama said. There was something unusual in the fox's voice. Not fear. Kurama did not traffic in fear. But there was weight there, the particular heaviness of a very old creature recognizing something older than itself. That is not anything I have a name for. Great, Naruto said out loud, to no one. Another thing that wants a piece of me. He took a step back. The light stepped forward. It closed the distance without moving, which should have been impossible and was, and the warmth became total, became everything, became the only thing, and then there was no Valley of the End and no waterfall and no carved stone faces and no wet grass and no sound of anything at all. There was only the crossing. He did not fall through it so much as he was received by it. That was the only word that fit, received, the way a letter is received, the way a returning traveler is received, with the specific quality of something that was expected even if he himself had not known he was coming. He blacked out somewhere in the middle of it, and his last coherent thought before the dark took him was that Kurama had gone very quiet in a way the fox almost never did, and that the silence itself felt like awe. He woke on stone. Cold, smooth, perfectly level stone of a blue-gray color he had never seen in any quarry or cliff face in the land of fire. He was lying on his back and the sky above him was wrong, too white, a white that was not sky at all but ceiling, high and vaulted and carved with symbols he could not read from this distance. Around him the sound of water moved in channels he could not see, and the air smelled of something he had no name for, clean and old and faintly mineral, like the inside of a very deep cave that had never known darkness. He sat up. His body felt strange. Not painful. Not injured. Strange in the way a tuning fork feels strange when it has been struck against something that matches its exact frequency, vibrating at its own nature more completely than it usually did. His chakra, which he had always thought of as something he carried, felt closer to something he was. The distinction was small and enormous at the same time. Kurama, he said. Awake, the fox said. And deeply confused. Same. Naruto got to his feet. He was in a courtyard. That was the best word for it, though the scale was wrong. It was too large to be called a courtyard in any ordinary sense, the kind of space you build when you want to remind visitors of their own smallness. The stone pavers were laid in a pattern that echoed outward from the spot where he had woken, concentric rings of slightly varying shade, and the buildings at the perimeter were tall and close-windowed and wore the particular gravity of structures that had stood for a very long time. There were people at the far edge of the courtyard. They had stopped moving. They were looking at him. He could not read their expressions from this distance, but he could read their posture, the stillness of people who have seen something they cannot immediately explain and are deciding what to do about it. Several of them wore black. 2 wore white. One, standing slightly ahead of the others, wore a haori of an elaborate pattern that caught the 2 white light and gave nothing back. Naruto raised his hand. It was the only thing that occurred to him. He raised his hand and spread his fingers in the universal language of I am not here to fight, I am not sure why I am here at all, please do not make this complicated. There was a pause of several seconds, then the one in the elaborate haori turned to the others and said something he was too far away to hear, and 3 of them broke into what he recognized as movement with purpose, which in his experience meant either they were coming to help him, or they were flanking him. He put his hand down and waited to find out which. The answer arrived in the form of a woman who covered the distance in the time it took him to exhale. She simply appeared in front of him, which told him 2 things. First, she was very fast, and second, the speed was effortless, which meant she was holding most of it back. She was shorter than him by several inches, with dark hair twisted into a complex arrangement at the back of her head and eyes the color of still water that held no particular warmth and no particular hostility. She was looking at him the way a physician looks at something unexpected, with a clinical precision that was almost impersonal. You are breathing, she said. Her voice was even. That is unusual. I do that a lot, Naruto said. You should not be able to. She tilted her head a fraction. This is the Suriidai. Living souls do not arrive here in the flesh. The barrier alone should have separated your soul from your body the moment you crossed. I have been told I am bad at following rules. She did not smile, but something in her expression shifted by a degree that might have been the beginning of one. Yoriatsu, she said. It is unlike anything catalogued in the 400 years I have served as captain of the 4th Division. I do not know what Ryatsu is, Naruto said. Spiritual pressure. The force of your soul expressed outward. She paused. Yours is doing something I have not seen before. What is it doing? She was quiet for a moment. He had the sense that she was choosing her words with unusual care. It is giving, she finally said. Most Ryatsu takes. It asserts, it dominates, it displaces the spiritual pressure of those nearby. What yours is doing is the opposite. It is offering something outward into the surrounding space. Like heat from an open flame. Another pause. I have been standing within 3 meters of you for less than a minute, and something in me that has been closed for a very long time has opened slightly. Is that bad? Naruto asked. I do not know yet, Retsu Unohana said. But I intend to find out. The room they brought him to was not a cell but was arranged with the careful neutrality of a space where people are kept while decisions are made about them. There was a low table, cushions, a window that looked onto a garden of precise and geometric planting, and a tray of tea that had been placed by someone who clearly did not know what he was or whether he ate. He ate. He drank the tea. He sat with his knees folded and watched the garden and waited. Kurama was quiet in the way he got when he was thinking hard. What do you make of it? Naruto asked him, keeping his voice low. I make that we are in a place that should not be able to hold us, the fox said. The dimensional architecture here is built around the nature of souls. Your body should have been stripped from you at the threshold. The fact that it was not means that whatever you are, to this place, is something it recognizes as native. I am not dead. No. But your chakra. A pause. Kurama did not often pause this long. Your chakra has always contained both life and death, Naruto. The Uzumaki vitality. The Jinchuriki legacy. The sage's gift. But in this place, surrounded by the spiritual architecture that sustains it, I am beginning to think that what we have always called chakra, your chakra specifically, may have a name in this world that is not chakra at all. What name? I do not know it yet, Kurama said. But I suspect we are about to be told. He was right. The door opened, and this time it was not the captain of the 4th Division who entered. It was a woman he had not seen yet, though something in her bearing suggested she outranked everyone he had met so far. She was tall, with features of a composure so complete it seemed structural, built into her the way load-bearing walls are built into a house. Her robes were different from the others, layered in a way that suggested both ceremony and function, and across her back was something he recognized as a carrying frame of some kind, though what it carried was folded and still. She looked at him for a long time before she sat down across from him. "My name is Senjamara Shutera," she said. "I am a member of the Royal Guard. I have come from the Soul Palace because the moment you arrived, something in the palace itself changed. A resonance we have not felt since the beginning." Naruto said nothing. "The Soul King," she said, "is the cornerstone of all existence in this world. The balance between the living world, Soul Society, and Hueco Mundo rests entirely on his power. He is not like you or me. He does not move or speak or act. He exists, and his existence is the mechanism by which all souls cycle, live, and return." She folded her hands in her lap. 3 years ago, the Soul King was killed. What remains of him is a fragment, enclosed and sustained by the Royal Guard through means I will not detail here. The balance is maintained, barely, by will and sacrifice and the constant labor of those of us who remember what he was. "And you are telling me this because?" Naruto asked. Senjamara looked at him steadily. "Because when you arrived in the Siriidii, the fragment responded. It has not responded to anything in 3 years. She paused. It responded the way a compass responds to true north. Outside, the geometric garden held its precise and patient shapes. Naruto sat with the weight of what she had said and felt, somewhere in the deep architecture of himself, something very old beginning to wake up. Chapter 2. True North. The dimensions of the room felt smaller now, or perhaps Naruto felt larger in it, not physically but in the way a flame takes on more presence when the wind stops. Senjamara had not moved from her seat across the table. She was watching him with the particular focus of someone who has trained themselves not to show what they are feeling, which meant she was feeling quite a lot. "I need to be clear with you," Naruto said, "because I am going to ask questions that might sound obvious from where you are sitting, but I have only been in this place for a few hours and I still do not fully know where I am." "Ask." "The Soul King. This cornerstone of your world." He picked up his tea, found it had gone cold, set it back down. "You are not suggesting I am him?" "No," Senjamara said. "Not precisely." "Then what precisely?" She was quiet for a moment in the way that told him she was deciding not how to explain but how much. "There is a doctrine older than the Godai 13, older than the Royal Guard, older than most of what passes for recorded history in this world. It holds that the Soul King was not always what he became. That before the current age, before the crystalline stillness that defined his existence for millennia, there was an original state, a primordial condition of the soul that governed this world through presence rather than power, through giving rather than taking." She paused. "We called that original state the yang of all things. The life-giving essence. The warmth that preceded the structure." Naruto felt Kurama go still in a way that was different from thinking. This was recognition. "The yang of all things was separated from the Soul King in the earliest age," Senjamara continued. "Not by violence. By necessity. The architecture of the current world required a fixed point, something unchanging and absolute, and the original nature was too alive for that. Too dynamic. It could not be the cornerstone of a structure because it was always in motion, always giving outward, always in process. So it was separated, and what remained became the Soul King as history knows him, and what was taken away." She met his eyes. "Was sent to be reborn, again and again, in the living world." The silence in the room had a texture to it. "You are saying it landed in me," Naruto said. "I am saying," Senjamara replied carefully, "that the resonance pattern of your spiritual energy matches what the oldest records describe as the primordial yang signature with an exactness that is not coincidence." She looked at her own hands for a moment. "And I am saying that when you arrived, the fragment of the Soul King, which has been silent for 3 years, began to pulse. Regularly. Like a heartbeat. You have seen this before? No one alive has seen this before." A pause. "I have been alive for a very long time." He let that settle. Around them the building was quiet in the particular way of places that contain many people all being deliberately quiet at once. "What do you need from me?" he finally asked. Senjamara looked at him with an expression that had shed one of its layers. "I need you to come to the Siriidi's oldest place," she said. There are women here who have served this world since its earliest organized era. Captains and founders. Women who have carried wounds that do not heal because what wounded them was not physical. Her voice remained even, but something beneath it shifted. They feel your presence already. Even from this distance. I watched Unohana return from meeting you, and there was something in her face I have not seen in 400 years. What was it? Relief, Senjumaru said. The kind that only comes when something you had stopped believing in turns out to be real. Naruto was quiet for a moment. He thought about people carrying things for a long time. He thought about Kakashi-sensei, who had carried Obito for decades in a wound behind his eye. He thought about his mother's face and the memory she had given him, that desperate, exhausted love. He thought about every person he had ever met who was tired in a way that sleep could not touch. Okay, he said. Okay, Senjumaru repeated, as though testing the word. I will go. I will meet them. He looked at her steadily. But I want to be clear about something too. Speak. I am not a cornerstone. I am not a fixed point. I do not sit still and hold things up through sheer existence. If whatever I am can help people, I will help people, but I do that by moving, by acting, by actually being present with someone, not by sitting in a palace and being a concept. He let the word settle. If that is useful to you, then let us go. If you need a cornerstone, you need to find someone else. Senjumaru looked at him for a long time. Then she stood up, and for just a moment, the composure that defined her face shifted into something that was not quite a smile, but was its immediate predecessor. I think, she said, that you may be exactly what this world has been missing. They left together into the white-lit corridors of the Tsuruidai, and behind them, in his place of confinement, the cold tea sat untouched, and somewhere in the deep structure of the palace above the clouds, a light that had been dark for 3 years pulsed once, twice, and settled into a rhythm. The path to the First Division's inner hall took them through 3 courtyards and 2 sets of gates that opened before Senjumaru without ceremony, responding to something in her presence that was clearly not authority but older than it. Naruto walked beside her and felt the Tsuruidai paying attention to him the way a landscape pays attention to weather, not consciously but structurally, the stones and air and carved pillars all somehow oriented toward the warmth he carried without knowing he was carrying it. Kurama had stopped being quiet and started being something else. Naruto could feel the fox cycling through emotions the way a scholar cycles through references, fast and methodical. The Uzumaki, Kurama said privately. The connection to the sage. The yang chakra that healed and gave. Naruto. I have known what you were for a long time, in pieces. I have never put the pieces together all at once before. And now I think this place is showing me the frame they fit into. A pause. I am not frightened. I want to be clear about that. But I am very aware that we are standing in the center of something much larger than either of us understood this morning. When is it ever different? Fair point, the fox said. The inner hall of the First Division was large and severe and lit by no visible source, the light seeming to emanate from the walls themselves, that same white that was not sky. There were chairs arranged in a rough arc, and several people already seated in them, and the quality of the attention they directed toward the doorway when Naruto entered was unlike any attention he had felt before. These were very old souls. He did not mean old in the sense of aged or diminished. He meant old in the way a mountain is old, the kind of age that has passed through every season so many times it has stopped noticing them individually, and instead carries them all at once. The women seated in that arc had faces that were composed and present, and beneath both things, marked by something he recognized because he had looked for it all his life and learned to find it even when it was well hidden. They were tired, not sleepy. Tired in the deep structure way, the way of beings who had carried enormous weight for longer than any weight was meant to be carried, and had done so without complaint because there was no one to complain to, because the weight was simply what the world required. He knew that particular exhaustion. He had grown up around it in the third Hokage's eyes. He had felt the edge of it in his own chest after the war. He walked into the hall and felt his chakra, his yang, his whatever it was, respond to the room the way a fire responds to a draft, not diminishing but brightening, reaching outward toward all those accumulated wounds with the uncomplicated instinct of something that exists specifically to give. The woman at the center of the arc, the one whose presence anchored the others the way a keystone anchors an arch, looked at him from behind eyes that held centuries of precision and something that had not been there an hour ago when Unohana had assessed him in the courtyard. It was there now, though. Faint. Tentative. But there. Hope. Sit with us, Retsu Unohana said. He sat. And the hall, which had been cold with the particular cold of spaces that hold grief too large to name, was fractionally less cold. It was a beginning. Chapter 3. What was set aside. The names came slowly at first, the way water comes through stone, finding the cracks that were already there and widening them gently. He learned them in order of how readily each woman offered them, which told him something about each of them in itself. Unohana had already given her name, so she sat with the ease of someone who had crossed that threshold and was now watching to see what happened next. To her left sat a woman called Ising, who was tall and white-haired and younger than the others in the relative way that centuries measure youth, noticeable in the fact that her guard was slightly less architecturally complete. She offered her name with the quick directness of someone who had decided that whatever this was, reserve was probably the wrong tool for it. To Unohana's right was a woman who introduced herself as Yoruchi, though there was something in the way she said it that suggested the name was more habit than identity, worn like a comfortable coat. She was watching him with a kind of bright, technical interest, the look of someone who collects rare things and has just encountered something they did not know existed. She did not look tired the same way the others did. She looked like someone who had chosen to keep moving specifically to avoid the stillness in which tired lived. Then, at the far end of the arc, two women who had not yet offered names. One of them he had already met. Senjumaru sat with her hands in her lap and her bearing unchanged from the corridor, except that there was now the faintest line of tension between her brows that had not been there before. It was subtle enough that he suspected most people would miss it. He did not miss it. He had spent too much time looking for the thing people's faces did when they were trying not to feel what they were feeling. The other was a woman whose name he waited for with patience, watching her watch him. She was the oldest feeling person in the room, not visually, none of them showed age in any conventional way, but in the quality of her stillness. It was not the stillness of control. It was the stillness of someone who had been in motion for so long, and so hard that stopping had become its own kind of momentum. She wore her hair long and loose in a way that suggested she had stopped caring about certain kinds of presentation, not from carelessness but from having moved beyond the part of existence that required it. Her eyes were the gray of deep water in winter. He waited. She let him wait. Then, finally, Yuichiro Unohana. He blinked. He looked at the woman he had been calling Unohana, who looked back at him with the small composed suggestion of someone who had expected exactly this reaction. You have the same name, he said. I gave her mine, said the gray-eyed woman. A long time ago. She earned it. She said it without particular warmth and without resentment, as a statement of fact, and in the saying of it something passed between the two women that he did not try to interpret because it was clearly not his. What should I call you? He asked the gray-eyed woman. A pause. Most of those who knew my original name are dead. That does not answer my question. Something shifted in her face. It was not the beginning of a smile. It was earlier than that, the moment before the thought of a smile, when the face remembers that such expressions were once possible. Yuichiro, she said. The original. Yuichiro, he repeated, and the name sat quietly in the room. He looked around the arc at all of them and felt again what he had felt in the doorway, that deep reaching out of whatever he was made of toward all those deep-held wounds. It was not something he was doing deliberately. It was more like the way warmth moves from a fire. Physics. Inevitability. Can I ask you all something? He said. You can ask, Yoruchi said, which was a very specific kind of permission. How long have you been carrying it? Whatever it is that is making you tired. The silence that followed was long enough that he started to think he had misjudged, overstepped, been too direct too fast. It would not have been the first time. But then Unohana, the younger one, the one who bore the name she had been given, said quietly, I have been captain of the 4th Division for 270 years. Before that I was something else. Something that I set aside because this world needed a healer more than it needed what I was. She paused. Every year that passes in this role, the part of me I set aside becomes harder to remember clearly. What were you? He asked. The first and strongest fighter the Godiai 13 ever produced, she said simply. There was a time when my name was something that made even the other founding captains be careful where they stood. He looked at her steadily. There was nothing about this that surprised him. He had met enough people who had made themselves smaller because the world needed something smaller from them to recognize the shape of it. He said, that part of you is not gone. I can feel it from here. Unohana looked at him. I can feel all of it, he said, and he did not mean it as something remarkable, only as something true. You have been in this room and I have been in this room for about 10 minutes, and I can feel the outline of everything each of you is and everything each of you put away because it did not fit what was needed. It is all still there. He looked at Yuichiro. Yours in particular. The original Yuichiro said nothing, but her hands, which had been folded in her lap, tightened fractionally. I do not know what I can do about it, he continued. I do not know what this place thinks I am or whether it is right. But whatever my chakra is doing in this room, if it is helping, if it is even a little bit useful, then I would rather stay here and keep doing it than sit somewhere being explained at. He looked at Senjumaru. No offense. Some taken, Senjumaru said, but her voice had lost a layer. The palace fragment, Yuichiro said abruptly. Everyone in the room stilled. It was clearly not a subject she raised casually. Senjumaru told you about it. She did. It has been pulsing since you arrived. She looked at him from behind her winter-gray eyes. It pulses in the same rhythm as your heart. Naruto had not known that. He took a breath and tried to feel for it, and after a moment he did, a distant echo, faint as the sound of someone knocking on a door at the far end of a very long house. He had felt that rhythm before. He had assumed it was his own. How long has it been doing that? He asked. Since the moment you crossed the barrier. She paused. The fragment has not had a heartbeat since the Soul King was killed. It pulses when directed by an external source. It does not generate its own rhythm. She met his eyes. It is mirroring yours. He sat with that for a while. Outside the hall, the white light of the Siriidii held its absolute and patient quality. Inside, something was shifting with the slowness of geological things, the kind of change that happens at the level of foundations. Naruto pressed his palms flat on his knees and breathed and felt his chakra moving outward through the air of the room the way it always did now, the way it had done since the war, reaching without agenda toward whatever needed reaching. He felt the moment it touched something in Yuichiro that had been locked for a very long time. She did not move. She did not change expression. But the quality of her stillness changed, the way ice changes when it is 1 degree above the temperature at which it is no longer ice. Not melted, but different. Something had shifted in the architecture of her stillness, some weight redistributed, some tension released from a support that had been bearing it alone for too long. She looked at him. He looked at her. I am going to ask you to stay in the Siriidii for a time, she said. Not as a prisoner. Not as a subject of study. As a guest of the oldest captains of the Godiai 13. A pause. And I am going to ask because I have not asked anyone for anything in 400 years, and I find, to my considerable surprise, that I am asking. Yes, Naruto said. She blinked. It was, he suspected, the least composed she had been in some time. That was very fast, Unohana observed. I said I would help if I could, he said. This is me being able to. He looked around the arc. All of you. Whatever you are carrying, whatever got set aside, whatever has been locked. I cannot promise I can fix it. But I can promise I will try, and I do not quit. Yoruichi made a sound that was nearly a laugh. I have heard that before, she said, but there was something in her eyes that had not been there when he walked in. It was not quite hope. It was hope's outline, the space where hope would go if the material were available. He intended to provide the material. Chapter 4. The Room That Remembered. They gave him quarters in a wing of the 1st Division's secondary compound that had not been used in some time, the rooms tidy with disuse, the window overlooking a plum tree that had grown at an angle no one had bothered to correct. He liked it immediately. Senjumaru stood in the doorway after the others had departed and watched him examine the room with the specific attention he gave everything, looking at corners, testing the floor with his heel, standing at the window and cataloging the garden's particular geometry. You look at everything, she said. Habit. He turned. You learn more from corners than from centers. Centers are what people want you to see. Corners are what they forgot to arrange. She was quiet for a moment. What do you see in this room's corners? He looked. The dust was heaviest in the northeast corner, which meant the window's light came primarily from the south and west, and the corner behind the door was the coldest. Someone had, years ago, left a small object on the highest shelf, a folded piece of cloth, and either forgotten it or left it deliberately in the way that people leave things in places they might come back to. The door's hinges were the original, well-maintained, never replaced, which told him about the standards of whoever looked after this building. Whoever lived here last, he said, cared about the things in it more than about being seen caring. Senjumara's hands, which were perpetually busy, making small adjustments to fabrics that did not need adjusting, stilled for a moment. I lived here, she said. Long ago. Before the Royal Guard. Before a great deal of things. I know, he said. She looked at him sharply. How? The cloth on the shelf. The way you stood in the doorway instead of crossing it. This is your room and you are deciding whether to reclaim it. He kept his voice even, not clinical, just honest. You do not have to explain it to me. She stood in the doorway for another moment. Then she crossed it. She crossed it with the particular deliberateness of someone making a decision they know is significant, and have decided to make anyway, and she went to the shelf and lifted down the folded cloth and held it without opening it, her hands very still. The Royal Guard gives purpose, she said. It gives function. It gives a framework within which to be useful. A pause. It does not give everything. No, he agreed. It would not. You are very young, she said, and he could tell she meant it factually, not as diminishment. For a human, certainly. For whatever this place thinks I am, I have no idea. He sat on the edge of the low sleeping platform. Can I ask you something? You asked that before and I notice you ask whether you can ask rather than simply asking. Why? Because some questions are worth checking first. He looked at her. What did you make, before everything? I know you make things now, the construction frames, the tools, the architecture of the royal palace. But was there something you made before all of that was for you? Just for the making of it? Senjumara looked at him. The question clearly landed somewhere. She opened the cloth. Inside was a length of silk in a color he did not have a word for, somewhere between gold and the light just before dawn, and worked into it with a needle so fine the thread was nearly invisible was a pattern he recognized after a moment as a map. Not of any place he knew, but a map in the cartographic tradition, careful and loving and precise, of the Soul Society as it was, she said. Before the walls were built the way they were built. Before the districts were divided the way they were divided. She ran one finger along the line. This was the original design. What I would have made, if I had been making rather than accommodating. It is beautiful, he said, and meant it. She looked at him with an expression that had been disassembled down to its components, and was only slowly reassembling. You see it as a work, she said. Not as evidence of something. It is a work. A good one. He looked at it carefully. How long ago did you make this? 300 years. Have you made anything since that was just for making? The question sat in the room. No, she said. You should, he said. The world you are holding together does not need you to stop being an artist to hold it. It needs both things. He looked up at her. Both things are what you are. Senjumara looked at him for a long time, holding her 300-year-old map in hands that could build anything and had spent 3 centuries building only what was required. Then she folded it again, carefully, along its original creases. I will, she said, and the word was so simple and so heavy that he did not say anything else, only nodded once, and it was enough. He woke in the night to Karama's quiet presence, which was not unusual, but the quality of it was different, attentive rather than restful. You feel it? Karama said. He did. Something in the deep fabric of the Siriidii was moving, not dramatically, not with the violence of spiritual pressure and conflict, but with the slow shift of something tectonic. Like plates adjusting. Like a building settling into new weight-bearing. It started when you went to sleep, Karama said. Your chakra does not stop when you sleep. You know that. It radiates continuously. I know. Here it has more to reach. A pause. This world is built of souls, Naruto. Every stone, every building, every carved gate. It was made by people who poured their spiritual nature into their craft over centuries, and it has been sitting under the weight of 3 years of wrong balance, the absence of the Soul King's heartbeat creating a kind of structural grief in the material itself. Another pause. Your yang chakra has been moving through that material since you fell asleep. Slowly. Carefully. Like water through dry earth. Naruto lay on his back in the dark room and felt it now that he was attending to it, the slow outward movement of what he was into the fabric of what this place was. It did not feel voluntary. It felt like breathing. Is it doing damage? He asked. No, Kurama said. The opposite. A sound in the fox's voice that might, in a creature less proud, have been wonder. Naruto. The stones outside your window. I can feel them. What? The plum tree. The garden wall. The gate at the end of the compound. Kurama was quiet for a moment. They are less sad. He stared at the ceiling. Stones do not feel sad, he said. These do, Kurama said. This entire world does. It was built by souls who knew what the Soul King's warmth felt like, and it has been 3 years without it, and the grief is structural, the way you said grief gets when it goes on long enough without being addressed. A pause. You are addressing it. Passively. In your sleep. He thought about that for a while. Is this going to keep happening? I think it happens whenever you are anywhere, Kurama said slowly. I think in the living world it was simply harder to see because the living world is noisier. Here, in a world built of soul stuff, in a world that recognizes what you are at the level of its own architecture, it is very visible. A pause. Or rather, it is very feelable. And the women, he said? The captains. Yes, Kurama said. Them especially. He thought about Yuichiro's stillness, and the fractional change in it. He thought about Senjumaru's folded map. He thought about Anohana's voice saying, I set aside what I was. These people have been carrying things for a really long time, he said. Yes. And whatever I am helps with that. It appears so. Then I am going to stay a while. He felt Kurama consider this, not weighing it, not calculating, just sitting with it the way the fox sat with things that were simply true. Yes, Kurama said. I thought you would say that. Outside, the plum tree that had been growing at an angle for as long as anyone had been bothering to not bother correcting it swayed in a wind that was not blowing, leaned fractionally more upright, and was still. Chapter 5. Founding Stone. He asked Unohana to teach him about the Suriidai. Not the political geography or the institutional hierarchy, she had people who could tell him that, and some of them had already tried, but the actual place, its nature, its texture, the history that lived in its walls. He asked her because she was the oldest continuous captain, because she knew it better than anyone who currently walked it, and because he had noticed in their first meeting that she had the quality of someone who becomes more herself when she is explaining something she genuinely understands. She accepted without making a ceremony of it. They walked. She was a deliberate guide. She did not list facts. She told him what she felt about things, which was more useful. She stopped at a gate that had been repaired in the 203rd year of her captaincy after a conflict she described in 3 sentences with the economy of someone who had processed it thoroughly, and no longer needed to spend words on it. She showed him a wall where the stone had a slightly different color, and explained that the original material had been sourced from a quarry that no longer existed, that the people who had worked that quarry were all long gone, that the wall was the last place in the Suriidai where that particular kind of stone could still be found. She pressed her palm flat against it as she spoke, and he understood that for her this was not architecture. It was memory made solid. Do you miss the early days? He asked. She considered this for long enough that he knew she was not reaching for the polite answer but for the honest one. I miss the clarity, she finally said. In the earliest years of the Godiai 13, everything was immediate. The threats were direct and the responses were direct, and there was very little space between the problem and the action. She looked at the different colored wall. Later, everything became layered. Political. Strategic. each action carrying implications for things that would not manifest for decades. She paused. I am not built for decades. I am built for moments. You seem patient to me. Patience is not the same as being built for the long view, she said. I have learned patience the way anyone learns a tool that does not come naturally. Through use and necessity. She looked at him. What are you built for? He thought about it honestly. Moments too, he said. The single person in front of me. The immediate problem. I am terrible at strategy and pretty good at just being there when it matters. He paused. Most of the time the strategy sorts itself out if enough people are just genuinely there when it matters. Unohana looked at him with the careful attention she gave everything. That is an unusual philosophy for someone whose presence apparently matters at a cosmic scale. I try not to think about the cosmic scale. It is too big to do anything useful with. He fell into step beside her again as she continued walking. You cannot love a world. You can love people. You can be present with people. You can make a difference to the person who is in front of you right now. Do that enough times and maybe the cosmic scale sorts itself out. She was quiet for a long time after that, walking, and he let her be quiet because the silence had the quality of someone sitting with an idea and turning it over carefully rather than the silence of nothing being said. They reached a part of the Siriidii he had not seen yet, a district of lower buildings and narrower streets where the architecture was older than anything else he had walked through, the stones more worn, the proportions slightly different from the current standard, the scale of a different era. There were no division compounds here. Just old streets and old buildings and the sense of something that had been allowed to remain as it was because there were people who remembered why it mattered. This is where the Godii 13 began, Unohana said. Before the compounds, before the formal structure, before any of the things that define it now. She stopped in the center of a small square. 13 captains in 13 separate territories, and this square was where they would meet when meeting was necessary. Neutral ground. The stone of the square was the same old quarry material as the wall, and it was everywhere here, the entire square laid in it. He could feel it differently from the newer stone, something in it that was more lived in, more saturated with long association. He pressed one foot flat on it, and felt his chakra respond the way it had been responding to everything in this place, reaching down and outward and giving. Unohana made a small sound. He looked at her. Her hand had come up to her sternum without her appearing to notice, pressed flat the way her hand had been flat against the wall. What is it? He asked. There is something. She paused. There is something moving in the stone. She looked at him, not with alarm but with that precise clinical attention, and behind the precision was something he recognized. The founders laid their Ryatsu into this square when they built it. All 13 of them. It was a foundation stone, a binding of intent, a record of what they meant to build. She looked at the ground. That record has been fading for centuries. I have felt it dimming year by year for as long as I have been aware of it, and I assumed it would simply be gone one day, and that would be a loss I had accepted. She paused. It is not fading right now. What is it doing right now? Warming, she said. Slowly. The way embers warm when you give them air. He looked at the square and felt what he had been doing without deciding to do it. His yang chakra was in the stone of this square, had been since he set his foot on it, moving through the old mineral record of 13 founding signatures, not replacing them, not overriding them, just warming them the way she said, giving them the energy they needed to continue. I can stop, he said. Please do not, she said quickly, and then heard herself and looked briefly away and then back. Please, she said more carefully. Do not stop. He stayed standing on the square and felt the faint old signatures pulse gently around his foot. He thought about what Kurama had told him, about this world being built of soul stuff, about structural grief in the material. He thought about a square that 13 people had poured their founding intentions into, and how those intentions were still here, 300 or 400 years later, still present, just dimming from lack of the warmth they needed. Who were they? He asked. The other founders. The ones whose signatures are in this stone. Unohana was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet he heard the weight of something that had never been properly set down. 9 of them are gone, she said. Truly gone. Gone in ways that did not allow for cycling, for reincarnation, for any of the ordinary mechanisms of this world. A pause. 3 of us remain. Myself, Yuichiro, and... She stopped. He waited. There was a third, she said. The founding captain of the 11th Division. She is not present in the Siriidii. She left. Another pause. I do not know where she went, or whether she still exists in any form. But her signature is in this stone. He could feel it. 3 signatures still present with any real warmth, others barely there, a few completely cold. The 3 warm ones were Unohana, a signature he did not know, and one that pulsed differently from the others, more erratic, more distant, as though it were coming from somewhere else entirely. We will find her, he said. Unohana looked at him. Not today, he clarified. But eventually. If she is reachable, if her signature is still in the stone, then she is still there somewhere. He looked at the square. We will find her. Unohana looked at him for a long moment, and behind the precision and the centuries of composed patience, something that had been pressed very flat was straightening itself, slowly, carefully, the way a crushed flower straightens in water. You say that as though it is settled, she said. It is settled, he said simply. She looked at the square, and then back at him, and then did something he suspected she did very rarely. She made a sound that was the close relative of a laugh, quiet and surprised and genuine. You are remarkable, she said, and it was not flattery. It was a diagnosis. I am just not willing to accept things being lost, he said. I never have been. It has caused me a lot of problems. And solved more, she said. He shrugged. Most things work out the same way. You just have to stay with them long enough. Above them the white-lit sky of the Siriidii held its absolute depth, and in the old square below their feet, 400 years of founding intention pulsed a little warmer, and the plum tree back in the secondary compound leaned a little further toward upright, and in the Soul Palace above the clouds, the fragment of the Soul King pulsed in a rhythm that was no longer fading. Chapter 6. The long short term. Yoruichi found him on the 3rd day sitting on the roof of the secondary compound watching the light change over the Siriidii's white roof tiles, which was not a particularly Siriidii appropriate activity, but which he had done because nobody had told him not to. She appeared beside him with no preamble, which he appreciated. You are wondering why I am different from the others, she said. A little, he said. You do not seem as tired. I keep moving, she said. If you keep moving, the tired cannot catch you. It is a philosophy with some significant long-term drawbacks, but it has served me well enough for the short term. She sat, not folded, but the practiced easy sprawl of someone very comfortable in their own body. It has been a very long short term. He looked at her. The sharp amber eyes were direct and measuring, and he noticed that they did something the other's eyes did not. They took him in piece by piece rather than all at once, as though she were cataloging rather than assessing. It was the look of someone interested in how things worked. How did you end up here? He asked. This is my world, she said. I was born a Shinigami. This is where Shinigami are born. A pause. I left for a long time and then I came back and then things became complicated in the way things do and I found myself here, in this configuration, sitting on a roof with a human boy whose chakra is doing something extraordinary to the air around him. What is it doing to the air? She looked at him. You really cannot feel it, can you? From the inside. I feel it going out but not what it does when it gets there. She was quiet for a moment, and then she did something that surprised him. She turned her palm face up on her knee and held it there, and after a moment, the air above it shifted. He could not see what happened exactly, but he felt the direction of his own chakra flow change slightly, drawn toward the open palm. It is warm, she said. Not temperature. Warm in the way of something alive. When it touches something it gives it more of what it already is. Living things become more living. Growing things grow. Healing begins. She paused, her palms still open. For us, it is more complicated. We are not quite living in the conventional sense. We are souls sustained by Ryatsu. What your chakra seems to give us is depth. As though parts of ourselves that had become shallow or thin are being given back their original substance. Like refilling something. No, she said. Like remembering that you had more than you thought. She closed her hand slowly. Have you considered that you might be dangerous? Constantly, he said. About myself and other people. She looked at him with a cataloging look. Most people, when I tell them they might be dangerous, either deny it or lean into it. Both of those seem like bad responses, he said. The honest answer is that anything with enough power can be dangerous. The question is whether you use it carefully. He looked at the roof tiles. I have spent my whole life being something that could destroy people. I never wanted that to be the only thing I was. Yorichi was quiet for a moment. What did you want to be? He thought about that with the genuine attention it deserved. Useful, he said. Seen. Like it mattered that I specifically was there, not just that a body was present to fill a function. He paused. I grew up invisible. The kind of invisible that makes you loud, because if you are loud enough at least you register. I did not want to be loud forever. I wanted to actually matter to specific people in specific moments. He looked at her. Is that strange? No, she said. That is the most human thing I have heard in a very long time. A pause. And I do not mean that as an insult. I mean it as the most accurate description of what we all actually want, and have spent considerable effort building structures around instead of simply admitting. He nodded. They sat in silence for a while that was comfortable rather than empty. Yuichiro called a meeting for tomorrow, Yorichi said eventually. All 5 of us. She wants to discuss something she has been working through since you arrived. About the Soul Palace? About the future. A pause. Yuichiro does not call meetings for the past. She does not call them for the present. She only ever calls them when she has seen something in what comes next. She looked at him sideways. In 400 years I have learned that when Yuichiro calls a meeting, the thing she has seen is usually something nobody else wanted to look directly at. Sounds like someone I know, he said. Who? He thought of a woman in a red cardigan sitting across a desk with eyes that saw everything and the patience to wait for the moment when you were ready to hear it. He thought of the third Hokage's careful, oblique wisdom. He thought of every person in his life who had known something important and chosen the moment of the telling with care. A few people, he said. Good people. Yorichi looked at him. You have lost people, she said. It was not a question. Yes. Do you want to tell me about them? He thought about it. Not yet, he said. But eventually. Eventually, she agreed, and the word between them was a placeholder for a conversation that would come in its own time, and they both understood that, and it was enough. The meeting Yuichiro called was not in the inner hall. It was in a smaller room, lower ceilinged, with walls of very old material and a window that opened onto the old district's narrow streets. It felt chosen deliberately, not the formal room of institutional authority, but the room of people who have known each other long enough that formality is a courtesy rather than a necessity. They sat as they had in the hall but closer now, the arc tighter, more intimate. He was among them rather than facing them. Yuichiro began without preamble. When the Soul King was killed, a number of things became true simultaneously, she said. The balance became unsustainable without external maintenance. The cycling of souls, the passage from life to death and back, began to require active management rather than the passive operation it had been for millennia. She paused. The Royal Guard has been providing that management. We will continue to do so as long as we are able. Another pause, and in it, something that she was choosing not to soften. We are finite. The management we provide is not equivalent to the original function. It is a substitution, and like all substitutions, it is losing precision over time. The room was quiet. How long? Unohana asked. At the current rate of degradation, Yuichiro said, the substitution begins to fail meaningfully in perhaps 200 years. The complete failure of the cycle follows approximately 50 years after that. He watched the faces of the women around him absorb this. None of them showed it dramatically. They were too experienced for dramatic response. But he could feel the weight of the number settling through the air, heavy and cool. You are telling us, Senjumaru said, because of him. Yes, Yuichiro said. She looked at him. Your presence is not cosmetic. The healing that has been occurring, in the stone, in the old square, in the palace fragment, in us, is not incidental. It is directional. Whatever you are, whatever the primordial yang is, it operates exactly the way the oldest records say it should. It does not sit still. It circulates. It reaches outward. It fills what is empty and gives what is needed, and the giving is not finite because it does not come from supply, it comes from nature. She paused. You cannot run out of what you are. I could get tired, he said. Could you? Yuichiro asked, and it was a genuine question, not a challenge. He thought about it honestly. Since arriving in the Siriidii, he had been giving outward constantly, passively, and he did not feel diminished. He felt, if anything, more himself than he usually did, as though this place and its sole architecture gave his nature something to work with that the living world, for all its vitality, could not quite match. I do not know, he said. Not from what I have done so far. Then here is what I want to say, Yuichiro said, and her voice had the quality of something long considered, prepared for in the way that only very patient people prepare. I have served this world since its beginning. I have given it everything I had and then found more and given that too, and I will continue to do so. But I am also 400 years old, and I have not, in 400 years, been able to say something very simple to anyone, because there has never been anyone to say it to. The room waited. We need you, Yuichiro said. Specifically you? Not a function or a power or a cosmic mechanism. You. She met his eyes. This world needs what you carry, and we, the women in this room, need someone who sees us. Not what we do. Not what we have been or what we provide. Who we are. He looked at her steadily. I already do, he said. The silence that followed was the loudest silence he had ever sat in. Outside the window, the old district's narrow streets held their patient geometry. The stones of the Siriidii continued their slow warming. In the Soul Palace above all clouds, the fragment pulsed in steady rhythm, and below it the world it anchored breathed a fraction more easily than it had in 3 years. In the small room, surrounded by the oldest living captains of the Godii 13, Naruto Uzumaki sat among people who had stopped waiting for something they had not known they were waiting for, and felt, underneath everything else, the simple and uncomplicated satisfaction of being exactly where he was supposed to be. He did not know yet what came next. He did not know about the third founder whose erratic signature pulsed from somewhere he could not locate, or the institutions that would resist what was happening in these rooms, or the full scope of what restoring the Soul King's function would require, or the long road that stretched ahead for all of them. He only knew that the room was warmer than it had been when they sat down, and that every face in it was carrying less than it had been an hour ago, and that this, the simple ongoing fact of this, was enough to build on. Act 2. The Things That Were Kept. Chapter 7. What the Palace Remembers. The Soul Palace existed above the clouds in the way that certain ideas exist above argument, not elevated so much as simply beyond the reach of ordinary contention. It floated on a platform of compressed ratio so dense it had passed through the phase of ordinary matter and become something else entirely, its own category of substance, the kind that only forms when spiritual pressure has been focused on a single point for long enough that the point becomes a place. Naruto had been told he would find it overwhelming. He did not find it overwhelming. He found it familiar in the disorienting way that certain things are familiar the first time you encounter them, not because you have seen them before but because some part of you recognizes them as something you always knew existed. They traveled on the Tenchurin, the royal guard's conveyance, which Senjimara had constructed herself, and which moved through dimensional space by a method she described only as intention resolved into architecture. He had asked her to explain further, and she had looked at him with an expression suggesting she was genuinely uncertain whether the gap between his understanding and hers could be bridged in the time available. He had not pushed it. He would get there. Yuichiro stood at the forward edge of the Tenchurin's platform and watched the cloud layer pass below them, and he stood beside her because he had noticed that she occupied the forward position not from habit but from preference, from the need to be the one facing what was coming rather than what had passed. Have you been to the palace before? She asked. Obviously not. I mean in any other life. She said it the way she said most things, as though it were simply a question with a factual answer rather than something strange. The records indicate the yang of all things was reborn a minimum of 9 times before this iteration. Each time in the living world. Each time in circumstances designed, whether by chance or intention, to develop specific qualities. She glanced at him. I have sometimes wondered what the previous versions were like. I am probably the loudest, he said. The corner of her mouth moved. It was very small, almost architectural in its precision, as though she had allocated exactly the facial resources appropriate to the remark and no more. But it was there. The records also indicate, she said, that none of the previous iterations made it here. To this place. In this form. A pause. They lived. They gave. They died. The yang dispersed and reformed and was born again. The cycle continued. But not one of them crossed into soul society, as a living body. She looked at him steadily. You are the first. What changed? We believe the killing of the Soul King created a pressure differential significant enough to pull the yang through dimensional boundaries it would otherwise have respected. She paused. In simpler terms, the wound was large enough that the thing designed to heal it could not stay away. He thought about that. Like an immune response. That is a reasonable analogy for someone from the living world, yes. The clouds broke below them and the palace emerged, and even he, who had not found it overwhelming, went quiet for a moment. It was not the scale, though the scale was extraordinary, the towers and walkways and suspended gardens covering an area larger than most villages he had walked through. It was not the light, though the light here was different from the Siriidi's white, warmer, more gold, the kind of light that suggested a sun even in the absence of one. It was the feeling of it. He had been radiating outward since he arrived in Soul Society, his yang chakra moving through stone and air and the old material of the Siriidii in a slow continuous giving. Here, for the first time since he crossed, something was radiating back. Not strongly. Not in any directed or intentional way. But there was something in the palace's architecture, in the razor-dense substance of its platforms and towers, that remembered warmth, and was responding to his presence the way cold metal responds to a hand pressed against it, drawing heat not because it was designed to but because it could not help it. The fragment, he said. Yes, Yuichiro said. You feel it from here. I have been feeling it since the Siriidii. I just did not know where it was coming from. He turned to look at her. How large is it? Small, she said. When the Soul King existed in his complete form, he was. She paused, searching for the right framing. Vast is not adequate. He was the medium through which all spiritual existence moved. He was not contained in a location so much as all locations were contained in him. Another pause. What remains is a fragment of that. It fills a room. It is sustained by the combined effort of the Royal Guard, which requires our continuous attention. You have been maintaining it for 3 years. Yes. And before that, maintaining everything else. The balance. The cycle. The palace. Yes. He looked at the towers. When do you sleep? She looked at him as though the question had arrived from a direction she had not anticipated and did not immediately have a route back from. We do not require sleep in the same way living souls do, she finally said. That is not what I asked? She was quiet for a moment. Not often enough, she said. Right. He turned back to the palace. We are going to fix that. Yuichiro looked at him for a long moment. This woman who was 400 years old and had not been surprised by anything in a very long time, and something in her face did the thing it had been doing since he arrived, that fractional shift, the movement of a weight that had been in one position so long it had left a mark, now lifting enough to show the mark was there. You say things like that, she said, as though the mechanism of fixing them is already clear to you. The mechanism is never clear at the start, he said. You start anyway. The mechanism shows up when you are already moving. She looked at the palace. Then let us move, she said. The interior of the palace was designed to make its occupant's scale irrelevant, the proportions enormous, the ceilings at heights that invited no particular relationship between the person inside and the walls around them. He had been in places designed to communicate power through size before. He had generally found that the places most secure in their power had the smallest rooms. The Royal Guard's living quarters, which Yuichiro showed him without ceremony, were smaller than the public spaces. Functional. Ordered. The rooms of people who had long ago edited their lives down to what was necessary and built walls around that. Senjumaru's room had no windows. He noticed but did not say anything. Anohana's room, which Yuichiro showed him at his request with a brevity that suggested she respected his reasons without fully understanding them, contained a collection of medical texts so old the material they were written on had passed beyond paper into something that existed only because it insisted on existing. And on the highest shelf, wrapped in the same care as Senjumaru's map, a sword, not her current Zanpakuto. Something older. Something that had been laid aside. He looked at it for a long time. She kept it, he said. She has kept everything, Yuichiro said from the doorway. That is both her greatest quality, and the thing that has made certain parts of her life very difficult to move through. He turned to look at her. You sound like you speak from experience. I keep nothing, Yuichiro said. It is the opposite problem. She said it without drama, as a factual accounting of a tendency she had long since identified and catalogued. I have found that if I hold nothing I cannot lose anything. It is also true that if I hold nothing I cannot be given anything. A pause. I am beginning to reconsider the strategy. He nodded and did not push it. With Yuichiro, you received what she chose to give and you held it carefully, because she was watching to see what you did with it. Take me to the fragment, he said. She did. The room the fragment occupied was the deepest in the palace, the most central, the one from which all the architecture radiated outward the way the Siriidi's pavers radiated from the spot where he had woken. The walls here were not constructed from rasure-dense material so much as they were the rasure, compressed past the point of ordinary matter into something that held its shape by absolute rather than physical necessity. In the center of the room, suspended in a cage of pale light maintained by structures he recognized as the work of Senjumaru's craft, was the fragment. It was the size of a large stone. Irregular in shape. Colorless in the way that contained all color. And it was pulsing, steady, patient, in the exact rhythm of his heartbeat. He stood at the entrance to the room for a moment, and just looked at it. Kurama, who had been building towards something in the back of his mind for the last several hours, said quietly, Naruto. I know, he said. Do you? I can feel it. He walked forward. It is not separate from me. It is not something I am supposed to fill, or heal or restore by doing something external to it. It is me. Or the part of what I am that belongs to this world. It has been sitting here waiting to be rejoined. Kurama was very still. If you do this, I know, you may not be able to leave. He looked at the fragment. He thought about the Valley of the End and the waterfall and the stone faces. He thought about Konoha and Sakura and Kakashi, and the life he had built from nothing and the people who had built themselves into it with him. He thought about Yuichiro, who had not asked anyone for anything in 400 years and had asked him. He thought about Senjumaru's map and Anohana's sword and Yoruichi's too long short term. He thought about the old square and the fading signatures of people who had meant something and were running out of warmth. He took one step forward. The fragment pulsed. He took another. The warmth in the room increased by a degree that was not physical. He stopped an arm's length from it, and looked at it, and said, not to it or to Kurama or to anyone in particular, I am not here to be absorbed into something. I am here to be what I am in this place, for these people, for as long as that is what is needed. The fragment pulsed. We do this gradually, he said. At the pace the world can handle. It pulsed again, and this time there was something different in the pulse, an acknowledgement he could not have explained to anyone who had not felt it. He pressed his palm flat against it. The light in the room changed. Chapter 8. The Resistance of Institutions. The Central 46 became aware of his presence on the 5th day. He had known it would happen. Institutions that have operated in a particular configuration for long enough develop something like an immune response of their own, a sensitivity to changes in their environment that they have not sanctioned, and the Siriidi's governing body was old enough and bureaucratically dense enough that its immune response moved slowly but thoroughly. The summons arrived in the form of 2 members of the Amatsukido escort with an extremely formal document that used approximately 400 words to communicate the information that could have been conveyed in 12, which was that he was expected to present himself before Central 46 at a time of their choosing. He read the document twice, folded it, and set it on the table. Yoruichi had been watching him read it from across the room. Your expression is very specific right now, she said. I have attended a lot of meetings I was summoned to by people who believe the summoning was the point, he said. It is usually the least useful part of any conversation. Central 46 does not respond well to people who treat their summons as one option among several. I am sure they do not. He looked at the document. Who are they, actually? Not what their function is. Who are they as people? Yoruichi considered this. 46 individuals selected from the oldest and most established families in Seoul society. Judges and sages, theoretically. In practice, people who have held authority for long enough that they have begun to mistake the holding of it for the exercise of wisdom. A pause. They were entirely dissolved once, approximately 3 years ago. What exists now is a reconstituted body, somewhat chastened, somewhat less chastened than the situation perhaps called for. And they have concerns about me. They have concerns about anything that exists in the Siriidii without their authorization. You exist in the Siriidii in a manner that suggests authorization is not among your primary concerns. She tilted her head. They also have concerns about what is happening to the old captains. What do they think is happening? She looked at him steadily. They think something is being done to the old captains. Something external. Something that changes them without their informed consent. A pause. They are not entirely wrong about the changing. They are wrong about the without consent. He stood up. I will go. Today? Now. If they want to talk, we can talk. I have no objection to talking. He looked at her. Will you come? Yoruichi blinked. It was a small blink, but it registered because she was not a person given to visible surprise. They did not summon me. I am not asking you as a response to their summons. I am asking you because I would like the company of someone who knows this institution, and will tell me honestly when I am about to make things worse. He paused. You seem like the person most likely to do that. Yoruichi looked at him for a moment, and something in her amber eyes shifted in the way of something that has been given more credit than it expected, and is deciding what to do with it. I will come, she said. Central 46's chamber was built, like most of the Siriidi's formal spaces, to conduct a specific kind of encounter. The elevated seating of the 46, the single open floor below, the acoustics that carried a voice upward to the assembly while giving the impression that the person on the floor was offering rather than projecting, all of it was designed to establish a relationship before a word was spoken. Naruto walked into the center of the floor, looked up at the assembly of 46 robed figures in their elevated positions, and felt his chakra adjust the way it always did in enclosed spaces, reaching out to the walls and the stone and everything the room was made of. Several of the 46 shifted in their seats. You are the entity referred to in the incident reports as the primordial anomaly, said the central figure, a man whose age was expressed not physically but in the quality of his certainty. You arrived in the Siriidii 7 days ago without authorization, without prior registration, without any of the ordinary mechanisms by which a new spiritual entity would be identified and assessed. Naruto Uzumaki, he said. From Konoha, in the land of fire. Nice to meet you. The pause that followed was long enough to be intentional. The Central 46 has reviewed the incident reports submitted by Captain Unohana and the preliminary assessment provided by the Royal Guard. We have concerns. I heard. What are they specifically? Another pause, briefer, the kind that a speaker makes when they have been asked to get to the point more quickly than they intended to. The changes occurring in the captains and former captains who have spent significant time in your proximity have not been authorized by this body. The alterations to the spiritual composition of the founding square in the old district have not been authorized. The resonance occurring in the Soul Palace between your spiritual pressure and the palace's fragment has not been authorized. With respect, Naruto said, none of those things required authorization. The healing a person experiences in the presence of something that gives warmth is not a procedure that can be scheduled. The old square was fading and I stopped it from fading. The fragment, and I recognized something in each other that predates this institution by a considerable margin. He kept his voice even. I am not inside your jurisdiction. Not because I am dismissing it, but because what I am is categorically prior to it. The chamber's acoustics carried his voice upward in exactly the way they were designed to, and the 46 received it in exactly the posture they had arranged themselves in, but several of them, he noticed, had pressed their palms to the armrests of their chairs in the way of people who have just felt something they did not expect. The warmth. It did not stop at the floor of the chamber. It moved through everything. The Royal Guard has confirmed your identity claim, the central figure said, after a moment that was slightly longer than the others. The designation Primordial Yang is documented in texts predating this body's formation by several centuries. We do not dispute the historical record. A pause. We dispute the implications being drawn from it by certain senior figures in this institution. What implications are those? That your presence here represents a permanent change in the structure of this world's governance. That the authority of this body should defer to what is being described as a primordial function. He paused. We are 4 centuries of legal precedent, established order, and institutional continuity. We do not defer to phenomena simply because they are old. Naruto looked at him. He thought about Yuichiro saying she had not asked anyone for anything in 400 years. He thought about the fragment pulsing in its cage of maintained light, steady and patient, waiting. I am not asking you to defer, he said. I am not asking you to change your laws or your structure or any of the things this body does. I am asking you to understand that there are women in the Siriidii who have been carrying something they should not have had to carry alone, and I can help with that, and I am going to. Not because I have authority over you. Because it is the right thing and I know how to do it. He looked at the elevated seats. If there is a legal mechanism you need to run to make yourselves comfortable with what is already happening, run it. I will cooperate with any process that does not ask me to stop doing what I am doing. And if we ask you to stop, then we will have a much longer conversation, he said, and at the end of it I will still be doing what I am doing, because what I am doing is keeping the foundation of your world from continuing to fail. The chamber was very quiet. Yoruichi, standing 3 steps behind him and to the left, said nothing. He could feel her attention on the room with the focused quality of someone cataloging reactions for later analysis. The central figure looked at him from his elevated position for a long time. And then, not entirely without grace, he said, the Central 46 will review the matter and provide a formal determination within 30 days. I will be here, Naruto said. He meant it as a simple statement of fact. Several members of the assembly received it as something else entirely. They left the chamber and walked back into the Siriidii's white light, and Yoruichi was quiet for several steps and then said, without particular emphasis, you just told the governing body of the afterlife that you were going to do what you wanted regardless of their decision. I told them I would cooperate with any process that did not ask me to stop doing something essential, he said. In front of Central 46, those are the same sentence. I know. He looked at the white sky. Was that wrong? It was honest, she said. Which in that chamber is roughly equivalent to scandalous. Another pause. They will not actually stop you. They cannot. The legal mechanism they would need to invoke has not been used in 200 years and requires a supermajority they will not get, because at least 8 of those 46 felt your chakra from their seats and are not going to vote against the only thing that has made them feel that way in a very long time. Good. You knew that, she said. I suspected it. He paused. The warmth reaches the stones. It reaches the signatures in the old square. It was going to reach 46 people sitting in a room made of the same material. He glanced at her. I did not plan it that way. I am not capable of that kind of planning. But I am capable of noticing what is true. Yoruichi looked at him sideways for a long moment. I have known many powerful people, she said slowly. In 400 years you encounter a fair number. I have known people who were powerful and knew it, and used it carefully. I have known people who were powerful and did not know it, and were dangerous as a result. I have known people who were powerful and denied it because the acknowledgement felt like pride. She paused. I have not known someone who was powerful and treated the power as simply one true thing about themselves among many others, no more or less important than the rest. Should it be more important? For most people it becomes more important whether they want it to or not, she said. It tends to crowd out the other things. That would be a waste, he said. The power is there to be used for things. The things are the point. Yoruichi was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed, not the near laugh she had produced in the inner hall, but an actual laugh, brief and genuine and slightly surprised at itself. I am very glad you came here, she said. And she meant it precisely and without elaboration, and it was one of the truest things anyone had said to him in a very long time. Chapter 9. The sword that was put down. He found Unohana in the old district on the 7th day. She was sitting on the steps of a building he had not been inside yet, one of the oldest structures in the founding area, its walls carrying the particular density of place that accumulates in buildings where significant things have happened. She was not in her captain's uniform. She was wearing something simpler, and she had her hair down, which he had not seen before, and she was holding a cup of something hot in both hands and watching the narrow street in front of her with the focused ease of someone who has located a few minutes of genuine rest and is being very careful not to disturb them. He almost did not approach. But she had heard him coming, he knew she had, and she had not moved or changed her expression, which was her way of telling him she did not mind. He sat on the steps beside her. They were quiet for a while. "I come here when the 4th Division compound becomes too much," she said eventually. "Which I recognize as an admission that should perhaps concern me, given that I have been captain of that division for 270 years. Seems like a reasonable place to come," he said. "It is." She looked at the street. This building was the first medical facility in the Siriidii. Before the 4th Division had its compound, before there were formal divisions at all, this was where injured Shinigami were brought. "I worked here for the first 40 years of my service." She paused. "I was not yet a captain. I was not yet a healer in the formal sense. I was someone who had decided to learn, because no one else was learning and people were suffering from the absence of the knowledge." "What were you before that?" he asked. "In those first years." She was quiet for a long enough moment that he understood this was not evasion but genuine consideration, the reaching back into history to retrieve something that had been filed away rather than kept close. "I was the most feared person in the Siriidii," she said finally. "Not feared in the way that strong captains are feared, with the precise appreciation of threat that comes from watching someone fight. Feared in the categorical way. The way you fear weather." She sipped from her cup. "I was not yet Unohana in those years. I was the first Kenpachi." He did not know what that title meant in its full historical weight, but he understood its gravity, and the distance between what he understood of that title and the woman sitting beside him on these steps was significant. "What happened?" he asked. "I fought," she said simply. "I fought because I was stronger than anything else and because in those early years the Siriidii's strength was tested constantly, and something had to hold the line. I held it." A pause. "And then there came a point where the thing that needed holding was not a line but a people. Where what was needed was not someone to break everything that threatened but someone to repair everything that the threats had broken." She looked at the cup in her hands. "I had to decide what I was for. I chose the repair. Do you regret it?" She considered this with the same careful honesty she brought to everything. "No," she said. "The choice was right. The people who were healed because I made that choice are worth the cost of the making." A pause. "But there is a difference between not regretting a choice and having completely reconciled oneself to its weight. I have not fully reconciled. I set something down 270 years ago, and it is still on the ground and I still know where it is." He thought about the sword on the highest shelf in her palace room. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "I saw it when Yuichiro showed me the room," he said. "I did not say anything because it was not the moment. But I saw it. What do you see when you look at it?" He thought about how to answer that honestly. "Someone who did not throw something away," he said. "Someone who put something down in a specific place and kept track of it, which is different. You knew you might want it back someday and you did not let yourself forget where it was." Unohana looked at him for a long moment, and in the look was something that had not been on the surface before, something that lived in the part of her she had described as set aside. It was not threatening. It was not dark. It was simply the look of a person who contained more than the role they occupied, and who was being, for the first time in a long time, seen in the fuller dimension. "My Zanpakuto," she said, "has two natures. It always has. One heals. One does something that has no name in the medical tradition, and is not discussed in the 4th Division." She paused. "When I chose to become a healer, I chose which nature to use. The other nature did not go away. It went quiet. And quiet is not the same as gone. Does it want to come back?" She thought about this. It does not want anything. It is part of me. What wants things is me, and what I want is. She stopped. Started again. I want to be complete. I have been half of myself for 270 years for very good reasons, and the reasons are still good. But being here, in this place, with you nearby, something in the half I set aside is becoming louder. She met his eyes directly. Your chakra does not just warm what is cold. It amplifies what is quieted. I can hear myself more clearly than I have in a very long time. He nodded slowly. He thought about what Kurama had told him, about the yang giving things more of what they already were. Is that all right? He asked. I am deciding, she said. And the honesty of it, the pure unguarded honesty of a woman who was 400 years old, and was telling him the truth as she found it, was one of the most complete things anyone had ever said to him. They sat on the steps of the first medical facility in the Siriidi's history and watched the narrow street and drank from cups that slowly cooled, and he felt his chakra moving through the old walls of the building behind them and understood that this building was part of her, had been part of her for longer than most civilizations had existed, and that sitting here was itself a kind of coming back, for both of them. After a while she said, I have been thinking about what you told Yuichiro. That we would find the third founder. I meant it. I know you meant it. I am thinking about whether it is possible. She set the empty cup down. She did not simply leave. The circumstances of her departure were. She paused. Violent. Not to others. To herself. She left because she could not stay without doing damage, and the only way she knew how to love something was to remove herself from the possibility of hurting it. She looked at the street. She would not have made herself easy to find. She left her signature in the stone, he said. She would not have done that if she wanted to be completely unreachable. Unohana was quiet. She left a way back, he said. She just needed something strong enough to be worth coming back for. He did not look at Unohana when he said that, but he felt her absorb it the way the old stones of the Siriidii had been absorbing his warmth, slowly and thoroughly and into the deepest structure. You understand people, she said quietly. I grew up without anyone understanding me, he said. You tend to learn the skill you most needed someone else to have. She looked at him then, and it was the look he had begun to recognize from each of the women in the ark, that moment of being seen not as a function or a force or a cosmic mechanism but as themselves, and being surprised that the surprise was still possible. He did not look away from it. Her name, Unohana said, was Ryunosui. And she used to sit in this exact spot and watch this street on mornings when the world was too loud. He looked at the step beneath him, and then back up at her. Then we will start here, he said. Chapter 10. What Isane carries. Isane Kotetsu was the easiest to approach and, he suspected, the hardest to reach, in the specific way that people who are kind to everyone have often built their kindness as a perimeter rather than an interior. He found this out on the 8th day, not from anything she said but from what she did not say, which was anything about herself that went below the surface. She had sought him out, which was unusual. The others waited for him to come to them, or Yuichiro orchestrated meetings with the precision of someone who has learned that certain conversations happen better when they are not announced as conversations. Isane came to him in the compound garden in the morning and said she wanted to show him something. He followed her. She took him to the 4th Division's medical wing, which he had not been inside, and showed him a ward with 40 beds, currently empty, and told him it had been established in the 43rd year of her service under Unohana's direction and that she had helped design the layout and select the materials for the examination tables and argued successfully for windows on all 3 exterior walls when the prevailing architectural convention favored solid walls for easier spiritual pressure control. She told him all of this with the specific pride of someone who has made something good and is glad of it. And none of it was about her. He watched her show him the ward and understood that she was very good at showing him things that were not herself. Isane, he said. She paused in the middle of a description of the inventory system. Tell me something that is not about a place or a thing or a procedure, he said. Tell me something that is about you. She looked at him. She was taller than any of the others, a height that in his experience often came with a particular self-consciousness, the awareness of occupying more space than expected. I am not very interesting, she said. That is not true, he said. And it is also the thing that people say when they have been told, directly or indirectly, that the things they find interesting about themselves are not the right things to find interesting. She looked at him for a moment. Then she sat down on one of the 40 empty beds with the unself-conscious practicality of someone who has spent enough time in medical wards that they have stopped seeing the furniture as anything other than furniture. I am afraid of ghosts, she said. He waited. Not of people who have died. Not of hollow or spiritual entities. She paused. I am afraid of the specific kind of ghost that is an expectation. What someone thought you were going to be before you turn out to be what you are instead. She looked at her hands. Unohana Taicho is the greatest healer in Soul Society's history. I have been her lieutenant for 160 years. Every patient who comes to this ward compares the care they receive to the care they remember from her. Every decision I make is made in the shadow of the decision she would have made. She paused. I do not resent her for it. I love her. I have learned more from her than I could have learned in any other way. But I am. She stopped. Tell me, he said. I am very tired of not knowing whether the healer I am is one I would have been without her, or whether I am simply the shape that the space around her left in me. She said it quietly and without particular drama, as a long-examined thought being finally spoken. I do not know who I am outside of this. She gestured at the ward. I have been in here for 160 years and I am good at it. I know I am good at it, but I cannot tell any more whether it is mine or borrowed. He looked at her for a moment. He thought about what it felt like to spend years trying to be something you had been told to want, and the slow confusion of not being able to separate the wanting from the being told. You can tell, he said. You just need to be somewhere quiet long enough to hear it. He paused. The windows. You argued for the windows when the standard was solid walls. She looked at him. You could have accepted the standard. It was easier and professionally unchallengeable. He looked at the windows, which let in the Siriidi's white light in long clean rectangles. You argued for something you believed in because the people in those beds deserved light more than they deserved optimal spiritual pressure conditions. He met her eyes. That was not Unohana. That was you. That is you. Isane was quiet for a long time. It is such a small thing, she said. It is not a small thing, he said. It is the thing that tells you who you are when the borrowed parts fall away. You see people in the beds, not cases to be processed. You fought for their comfort when fighting for it was inconvenient. He paused. That is yours. You built that from yourself. Not from the space around someone else. She looked at the windows. The light came through them in the clean, even rectangles she had designed and argued for, and would have designed and argued for in any life, any circumstance, for any version of herself. Your chakra, she said after a while? It is doing something different today. Different how? Quieter, she said. The other days it has been generous. Reaching outward. Today it is. Another pause. Listening. He thought about that. He had not been aware of making a distinction, but the word felt right. Here in this room, with this person who needed to be heard more than she needed to be warmed, he had adjusted without deciding to. Does it help? He asked. Yes, she said, and he could tell she was surprised that it did, that being listened to by something that did not need her to be anything specific was as useful as being given warmth. Yes, it does. They sat in the ward with its 40 empty beds and its patient windows and the light coming through in the proportions she had determined by arguing for something she believed in, and he listened, and she talked, and by the end of it she had told him about a recurring dream she had had for 60 years, and a style of cooking she had learned from a woman in the Rukongai who was long dead and whose name she still said before meals, and a drawing she had made as a young Shinigami of what she thought the ideal medical facility would look like that bore almost no resemblance to anything she had actually built, and made her laugh when she described it. She laughed in the way of someone remembering that they had a laugh. He felt the sound of it move through the ward the way his chakra moved through stone. Not healing anything. Just being real. They walked back through the compound afterward and she showed him the garden she maintained behind the medical wing, which she had not mentioned and which was not part of any tour or official presentation, a small garden of practical herbs mixed with flowers she had no clinical justification for, and had planted anyway because she wanted them there. He looked at the flowers. Those are yours too, he said. She looked at them for a moment. Yes, she said. I suppose they are. She said it like someone picking something up that had been on the ground for a long time and finding that it was still in good condition. Chapter 11. The Third Signature. On the 9th day Senjomaru came to find him. She came without announcement, which was unusual, and she had something in her hands, one of her construction tools, a needle of the kind she used to work with dimensional space, held with a precision that suggested she had been working with it, and had not put it down before coming, which meant she had come immediately upon deciding to come, which meant the decision had been urgent. I have found something, she said. He followed her to the workshop she had established in an unused room of the secondary compound, which in the 9 days he had been in the Siriidii had accumulated a remarkable density of material, bolts of fabric that existed in colors that did not occur naturally, threading frames of a complexity that suggested multiple simultaneous dimensions of work, and tools whose function he could identify approximately half of. On the central worktable was a piece of material he recognized. It was the same type of rasure-dense substance as the palace's walls, but this piece was small, the size of his palm, and it had been worked. Someone had inscribed something into it in a technique he did not know but recognized as the work of extreme precision over a very long time. Where did this come from? He asked. I made it, Senjomaru said. Or rather, the fragment made it, and I caught what fell. She stood across the table from him. When you pressed your palm to the fragment 7 days ago, the contact produced a response I was not expecting. There was an output, not energy, not warmth exactly, but something that materialized in the room after you left. Small pieces of residue. I have been analyzing them, and this piece. She touched the edge of it. Contains a signature I have seen before. Not in the current Siriidii. In the records of the founding era. She looked at him. It is the 11th Division's original captain. He was very still. The fragment released this, Senjomaru continued. Which tells me that when you made contact, the fragment's memory was activated. It remembered her. And the contact with your yang chakra was sufficient to produce a physical manifestation of that memory. A pause. The Soul King knew where she went. He was the medium through which all spiritual existence moved. He would have tracked her even after she left, and this piece carries that information. I believe so. I have been attempting to read it for 3 days, and the encoding is unlike anything in the current archival tradition. It predates the development of formal rasure inscription by approximately 2 centuries. She looked at the piece. I need more time. But I wanted you to know it existed. He looked at the piece of material and felt, faintly, the erratic pulsing signature he had sensed in the old square, the one that was distant and not quite in rhythm with the others. She is alive, he said. The signature suggests the probability, Senjomaru said carefully. I would not state it as certainty. She is alive, he said again, and this time it was not a probability assessment. It was the same tone he had used in the old square when he said we will find her, the tone of something decided rather than hoped. Senjomaru looked at him across the table. Something in her face had the quality it had carried since he arrived, but more so now, the careful attention of someone who is watching something they have spent a long time wanting to see and is not quite ready to believe it is real. How do you do that? She asked. Do what? Know things as certainties that other people can only know as probabilities. She said it not as a criticism but as genuine inquiry, the question of a craftsperson trying to understand a technique. It is not arrogance. I have met arrogance, and it does not look like this. This looks like something else. He thought about how to explain it. When someone is still there to be found, I can feel it, he said. Not physically. Not like sensing chakra. More like the way a fire feels warmer when it is being fed even from across a room. Something alive is always giving something out. If I am what I am, and what I am responds to that giving, then I can feel the difference between an absence and a presence that is simply far away. He looked at the material on the table. She is far away. She is not absent. Senjomaru was quiet for a moment. Then she reached for the piece of material with the precise movements of someone returning to work because the work had become, in the last few minutes, urgent in a way it had not been before. I will read it faster, she said. I know you will, he said. You always work faster when you know what it is for. She looked up at him briefly, and the look had the same quality as the map she had shown him, careful and precise and entirely hers. He left her to it. He walked back through the compound to the garden and sat beneath the plum tree that was, he was fairly certain, slightly taller than it had been 9 days ago, and let his chakra move outward through the Siriidi's stones and the softening light and the old district's worn streets, and the founding square where 12 out of 13 signatures still pulsed, 2 warm and certain and 1 erratic and distant and alive. Kurama had been quiet for several hours, which was the fox's way of processing something he had not yet finished processing. Say it, Naruto said. You are not going back, Kurama said. Not soon. Not in any ordinary timeline. Probably not. And you are all right with that. He thought about the valley and the waterfall and the people who would notice his absence. He thought about it honestly, giving it the weight it deserved. I am not all right with all of it, he said. There are people I miss. There are things I would have done. He paused. But I am here and what I am doing here matters, and the people I miss are people who would understand that. Most of them have made exactly the same choice in some form. He looked at the plum tree. You do not get to be the person who shows up for everyone and then refuse to show up when the need is larger than usual. Kurama was quiet for a moment. You are exactly the same as you were at 12, he said, and also completely different, and I have never been able to decide whether that is remarkable or simply who you are. Both, probably. Both, Kurama agreed. And there was something in the fox's voice that was, Naruto had decided after years of listening to it, the particular warmth of a very old and proud creature who had never learned to say what it felt directly and had never entirely needed to. The evening came in its gradual way, the Siriidi's light shifting from absolute white to the soft-edged quality that was the closest this place came to dusk. In the workshop, Senjomaru worked by the light of tools that generated their own illumination. In the palace above the clouds, the fragment pulsed. In the founding square, 3 signatures held their warmth. And somewhere at a distance that could not be measured in ordinary units, a 4th pulsed erratically, the rhythm of something that had been alone for a very long time and had not yet understood that it did not have to be anymore. Chapter 12. What Yuichiro Kept. He asked Yuichiro about the things she had said, about keeping nothing. He asked her on the 10th day, in the evening, when the Siriidi's white light was doing the thing it did at that hour, softening from absolute to something with an edge, the closest it came to the quality of sunset. They were in the small room with the old district window, the one she had chosen for meetings, and she had tea she was not drinking and he had tea he was. You said it was a strategy, he said. Keeping nothing so you could not lose anything. I said I was reconsidering it, she said. I know. I want to understand the original version first. He paused. If you are willing. She looked at the window. The narrow street was empty at this hour, catching the softened light in a way that made the old stones look, briefly, almost gold. In the founding era, she said, the Godii 13 lost people with a regularity that the current institution does not experience. We were still learning what the threats were, still developing the responses, still building the framework that would eventually make the work sustainable. She paused. I was old even then by the standards of the others. I had already lost a great many things before the Godii 13 existed. I had been losing things for long enough that I had learned to anticipate the loss and preempt it. She looked at her tea. If you hold nothing, the loss when it comes is simply the confirmation of what was already true rather than the removal of something real. That is very practical, he said. And very lonely. She did not flinch at the word. She received it with the same composure she received everything. Yes, she said. Both of those things. What changed? He asked. You said you are reconsidering. She was quiet for a moment that stretched in the specific way of moments that contained something being decided. You did, she said. He waited. The strategy worked, she said carefully, because the things I might have held were finite. People, objects, memories, the specific textures of time spent in a particular way. These are things that can be taken. She paused. What you are is not finite in that way. What you give does not diminish by the giving. I have been in proximity to you for 10 days and the warmth has not lessened. She looked at him. I cannot preempt the loss of something that does not follow the ordinary rules of loss. So the strategy fails. The strategy becomes irrelevant, she said, when what you might hold cannot be taken. A pause. You cannot lose the sun by misplacing it. He thought about that. That puts a lot of pressure on the sun, he said. Something moved in her face that was, this time, unmistakably the close relative of a smile. It does, she agreed. I am aware of that. Another pause. You are not distressed by it. I have been carrying very large things since I was 12 years old, he said. The carrying is what I do. Adding more carrying does not scare me. He looked at her steadily. What I would want, in return for being someone's son, is that they stop treating that as a reason not to show me what they are actually holding. Yuichiro was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the golden edge of the Siriides evening moved across the old stones. I was born in a place that no longer exists, she said finally. Not destroyed. Transformed. The earliest soul society was not this. It was wilder. More immediate. The rules of spiritual existence were not yet codified and the boundaries between states were more permeable and everything was louder. She paused. I was born into that, and I was strong in a way that did not fit the place I was born into, and for a very long time I thought the problem was me. A pause. It was not the problem. But believing it was shaped me in ways I have spent 4 centuries managing rather than resolving. He listened. I am, she said slowly, most myself in combat. In the immediate and total engagement with something that requires everything I have. I am at my least myself in political chambers and governance structures and the long, slow patience of institutional management. She said it without apology and without performance. For 400 years I have been doing institutional management because that is what was required. I have been doing it because I am good enough at it to do it well even when it is not who I am. She looked at her hands. But I have not been myself in 400 years. I have been the person who does the work. And now? He asked. And now, she said, something in the vicinity of your presence is making the distinction audible in a way it has not been. She looked at him. I do not know what to do with that yet. You do not have to do anything with it yet, he said. You just have to let it be true. He paused. The rest follows at whatever pace it follows. She looked at him for a long moment, this 400-year-old woman who had seen the earliest form of this world and the codified form and every form in between, and had managed them all with the precision of someone who had learned to mistake discipline for completeness. You are, she said, genuinely the most unusual person I have met in 4 centuries of meeting people. 400 years is a small sample, he said. I am probably not that unusual in the larger set. You are underselling yourself, she said, and it was precise and dry and entirely her own. He smiled. And Yuichiro, the original, the 400-year-old founder, the person who had not asked anyone for anything in the entire length of the Godai 13's existence, looked at that smile for a moment, and then very quietly and entirely without warning, smiled back. It was a small smile. It was an unfamiliar smile, the kind worn by a face that has kept the muscle memory but not the habit. But it was real, and the room received it the way the old square received the warmth of the founding signatures being revived, not with drama but with the thorough and unmistakable quality of something restored. He stayed until the tea was cold. She let him. Later, walking back through the compound in the dark, Kurama said, that was important. Yes. She has not smiled at anyone in how long, do you think? I did not ask, he said. It did not seem like the moment to ask. No, Kurama agreed. It was the moment to receive it. He walked through the compound and felt the stones beneath his feet and the warmth moving through them in every direction, patient and continuous, and thought about the third founder's erratic pulse and the piece of Reisher material on Senjumaru's worktable, and about what Unohana had said, that Ryunosui had left a way back but needed something strong enough to be worth coming back for. He thought about what it would take. He thought about the Central 46 and their 30-day review and the 8 members who had felt something from their seats, and would not vote against it. He thought about Isane's flowers that she had planted because she wanted them there. He thought about Senjumaru's map folded along its original creases and her decision, one word I will, that had been enough. He thought about all of it as he walked, and by the time he reached the plum tree and stopped beneath it and looked up through its branches at the Siriidi's version of sky, the thinking had resolved itself the way his best thinking always did, not into a plan but into a direction. Clear, immediate, and requiring only that he start moving. He pressed his palm flat against the plum tree's trunk. He felt the tree press back, or something that felt like pressing back, the response of a living thing to the warmth of another, simple and without calculation. Tomorrow, he said to Karama. Tomorrow what? The fox asked. Tomorrow we go back to the old square, he said. And we stay there until Ryunosui's signature is loud enough that she can hear us from wherever she is. Karama was quiet for a moment. You think she is listening, the fox said. I think she has been listening for 400 years and nobody had anything loud enough to say. He looked up through the plum tree's branches. We have something loud enough now. Above him the Siriidi's sky held its pale and patient depth, and in the founding square across the old district the 12 signatures pulsed in their varying degrees of warmth, and the 13th, the erratic one, the distant one, pulsed a fraction more steadily than it had the day before. Somewhere, a long way away, something that had been alone for 400 years was beginning, very slowly, to orient toward a source of warmth it had stopped believing it would ever feel again. It did not know yet what it was orienting toward. It would. Act 3, The Things That Return. Chapter 13. The Old Square at Dawn. He went to the founding square before anyone else was awake. The old district at that hour had a quality no other time of day could produce. The Siriidi's white light had not yet reached its full intensity, and what remained was something softer, closer to the gray of early morning in the living world, the hour when the shapes of things are present but their definitions are not yet firm. The narrow streets held the particular quiet of spaces that have been lived in for a very long time, and carried the accumulated silence of all those lives in their stones. He walked without hurrying. He had learned in his first days here that hurrying in the Siriidi produced results similar to hurrying in any place with its own gravity. You arrived slightly breathless at whatever you were going toward, and the arriving itself was slightly diminished. The old district rewarded patience. It was not a place that opened itself to people who treated it as a path to somewhere else. The square was empty when he reached it. He stood at its edge for a moment, and looked at it the way he had learned to look at things in this world, not just with his eyes but with whatever the yang was, that outward-facing quality of his nature that received information from the spiritual composition of things around him the way ordinary senses received light and sound. The 12 signatures were there, as they always were now, warmer than they had been before he arrived. The fading process halted, the old mineral record of 13 founding intentions holding steady in the stone. 2 of the signatures pulsed with the consistent warmth he had come to associate with Yuichiro and Unohana, recognizable now the way a person's voice becomes recognizable after enough time spent listening to it. And the 13th. It was more present today than it had been yesterday. Not dramatically. Not in any way that would have been visible to someone without his particular sensitivity. But it was measurably closer to the rhythm of the other 12, the erratic quality of it smoothing by degrees, the way a fraying rope stops fraying when the tension is properly distributed. She was listening. He walked to the center of the square and sat down cross-legged on the old stone the way he had learned to sit during the years of training on Mayaboku, the posture that opened everything outward and inward at the same time, spine straight, hands flat on his knees, breathing adjusted to the pace of the place rather than the pace of his own thoughts. He had not used sage mode since arriving in Soul Society. The natural energy here was different from the living world, denser in some qualities, thinner in others, carrying the specific character of a place whose fundamental substance was spiritual rather than physical. He had not tried to gather it formally because he had not needed to. What he was in this world did not require technique the way it required technique in the living world. But what he was about to do was not ordinary output. It was a call across a distance he could not measure, aimed at a signature he could feel but not locate, asking something to come back that had left specifically to protect the people and places it loved. That required everything. He breathed in. He felt the natural energy of Soul Society move through him the way it had been moving through him since he arrived, not as something gathered or controlled but as something invited, the way you invite a current to carry you by simply being in the water without fighting it. His yang chakra, which was always present and always moving, expanded. Not in the way of combat expansion, the bright overwhelming flood he had once used in the war. This was the opposite of that. Quiet. Specific. The expansion of something that wanted to be found rather than something that wanted to make its presence known. He thought about the signature in the stone beneath him. He thought about what Unohana had told him, that Ryunosui had left because she could not stay without doing damage, that the only way she knew how to love something was to remove herself from the possibility of hurting it. He thought about what that particular kind of loneliness felt like from the inside, the specific architecture of a person who has decided that their absence is their gift to the people they care about. He knew that architecture. He had lived near its edges his whole life, the orphan's particular familiarity with the weight of being present in a place that did not initially want you. He had not resolved his version of it the way Ryunosui had resolved hers. He had gone loud instead of going away, had insisted on being seen until the seeing became inevitable. But the underlying recognition was the same. You were here and then you were not here, he thought, and he directed it not as a formal message but as a feeling, as the thing that was truest about what he wanted her to know. And the place you left has been carrying your absence as a weight in its foundation for 400 years, and the weight has not diminished with time. And you did not actually hurt anyone by simply being here. You only believed you did, and the belief was wrong, and the people who love you have been waiting for the moment they could tell you that. The yang moved outward through the stone, through the 12 signatures and past them, following the faint thread of the 13th the way you follow a sound back to its source, patient and directional and without urgency. He stayed in that posture as the Suriidi's light came up around him, as the old district began its slow morning process of becoming defined again, as the narrow streets received the first Shinigami moving through them on their ordinary business. He stayed for 2 hours. At the end of the 2 hours, the 13th signature was pulsing in a rhythm that was, for the first time, synchronized with his own heartbeat. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough to know that wherever she was, she had felt it. Enough to know that she had not turned away. He pressed both palms flat on the stone and felt the warmth complete the circuit, moved through all 12 and the 13th and back up through him and out again, and said the only thing he had left to say, "I will be here when you are ready." Then he stood up and went to find breakfast, because whatever was happening at